Hello, my name's Martin Richards and this is a presentation for the Position and Practice module for my photography MA that I'm doing with the University of Falmout. The story starts in the 1980s. At 18 I joined the Royal Air Force as an avionics apprentice and was sentenced to spend 3 years at RAF Cosford. In the 80s, my first serious camera was a film camera. Specifically 35mm SLR. It was a Praktica MTL3. One of the magazines, and I can't remember which, described it as the sort of camera you could take camping and then use to hammer 10 pegs in with and still take photos. I spent 14 years in the RAF. That owing to the sort of work I did, photography was not normally allowed on the bases except on special occasions. By 2010, age 47, I had to take early retirement because of a spinal injury I received in the Air Force. So, being no longer able to work, I sort of faced a midlife crisis or decision point where I had to decide what to do with the rest of my life. And I went back to school. I went into Leicester College, De Montfort University, initially taking a foundation degree and then a top-up to BA in photography and video. What sort of photographer am I? I describe myself as a landscape photographer that likes to take photos of aircraft. I also have an interest in history and how the landscape has changed over the years and how it's been impacted by man. I started off using film cameras. Finally making the switch to digital in 2007. Over the years, although technology's changed, my attitude to photography has not changed. And I'm still trying to show people what it is in the landscape that I see when I take my photos. In taking this approach, which a lot of people also call getting it right in the camera, you have to understand that you actually see with your brain and not with your eyes. A classic photographer that sort of came across this as a concept in its truest sense was Ansel Adams, who worked principally in black and white, medium to large format cameras from about the 1930s to 1970s. Now, Adams, in viewing a scene, developed a methodical approach in assessing a tonal range of a subject and developed what he went on to call the zone system. In many ways, this parallels what we can actually do today with the modern digital camera, in that we can look at a histogram to actually understand the scene in front of us. Now, Adams would, in processing images within his classic darkroom, would manipulate his images to try and reproduce an image that told the truth of a scene as he saw it. And that's the same with my own photography. Looking at my own work for this presentation, I'd like to discuss a project that I shot as part of my foundation degree that brought together my love of landscape, history and aircraft. I shot a project based on the remains and what gets left behind when an Air Force base closes. Now, the trigger for this project was the early withdrawal from service of the GR9 Harrier. I was part of the design team for this aircraft. Not only did we lose the aircraft, but we also lost the last RAF base in Leicestershire and Rutland. The RAF from about the 1930s built its bases to a common pattern by which there was a main runway that aligned with prevailing wind and two crossing runways. This created a very distinctive shape in the landscape. RAF bases built during the Second World War just consisted of the concrete runways and the concrete bases for prefab buildings. Since the end of the Second World War, many RAF bases have been closed. The wartime bases had their prefab buildings sold off and the concrete removed for hardcore. In my own project, I wanted to try and record what was left, as with time, even the minor remnants of some of these bases is going to be consumed by nature or by redevelopment. I drew up a list and visited the sites. In some cases, the sites have reverted to nature, the runways had been taken out, and whilst there were scars in the landscape that you could see on the various online tools, when you got on site it was just an empty field. Others have been built over, but there were some sites that were real gold mines. In particular, it's former RAF Langham, Melton Mowbray, Bottisford and Wimswold. Now, mankind seems to be motivated by money, and if money can be made by selling off the buildings and the runways as rubble when they're no longer needed, that's fine, they're sold. However, if the land's not needed there and then, things just get left. My aim is to show these landscapes to people and make them think about what's all around them, because they just drive past them and just don't see what's there. For my main project as part of this course, again, I wish to explore this aspect of human nature in the way that we look at and regard buildings on our landscape and how we abandon things that we no longer need. Now, I've got two sort of possibilities for this. One's a rural project and one's an urban project. We had in this country a series of prisoner of war camps that were used to hold German, Italian and other Axis soldiers, sailors and airmen. Several such camps exist close to where I live. One of these camps, scrapped off, has recently come into the news with a proposal to finally build over the remnants of the sites some 70 years after it was finally closed. Like the RAF bases, this site was stripped after it initially closed, and today very little remains behind. Now, I visited this site in October and found the remnants of fences and the bases of some of the huts that at one time were used to hold over 2,000 prisoners. With this project, I want to take the opportunity to record what's left at this time and scrapped off in similar size before they do finally go. Also, I want to try and show probably what's happened to the sites over the years, and possibly the desolation and isolation for the people that were sentenced to these places, and what they would have seen inside and outside the wire. My alternative urban project, again, it takes a very similar theme in that we have buildings, and when we no longer need the building, we can discard them, leave them, redevelop them, reuse them, but quite often there'll be features of a building that get left behind. Now, in some cases in our city centres, we can look around and see the remnants of these buildings, and they've been slapped with preservation orders so that people aren't allowed to change them. But again, the signs and the history that these buildings carry, my task as I see it with my photography is to try and capture the truth of what's around us, what I see, and then show it to other people to actually get them to see, to view and appreciate the world that's around them.